All right, it's Excel Friday. So I know that you take these for granted, okay? Because we've got several of these this semester, but I've got bad news for you. We've got this Excel Friday and the next Excel Friday, and the Excel Friday is done, okay? No more Excel Fridays. No more Excel Fridays, probably for the rest of your college career. You may have to come sit in on my AIS classes just to actually get your fix on this. So enjoy this while you can. Experience with it. We actually got a pretty good one today. So we did some formulaic ones the last few weeks. This one I want to talk about some tools that are kind of newer tools. Some of them are a little bit established, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how to use some functions. Specifically, we're going to talk about XLOOKUPs today, and then we're going to talk about index match. And there's going to be a few things we're going to layer on to that. We're going to talk about why I don't like using XLOOKUP. You're going to say, because you're an old fogey, Dr. Barnes. And that is a true statement, okay? But that's not the reason I don't like using XLOOKUPs. So let's go ahead and open up Excel sample data set number 8. And you can see we got our instructor ratings. By the way, if you downloaded this early, you probably have a different version. You want to download the new one that's got Scott Templeton. I've got a former instructor on here. I'm not going to mention his name. His initials are TS. He's no longer here. He's now living the high life in Texas. Interesting story. My favorite restaurant in all of Texas is a place called Rose's Cafe. There is one right next to the campus of this individual, which given feelings like if he invites me to come visit, I'm going to be like, well, I don't want to see you, but I really want to go to that restaurant. Okay, I really want to go to that restaurant. They actually started in San Angelo, Texas, because you got Angelo State University. Okay, but he shall not be named. He's Voldemort for all intents and purposes. All right. So got some replacements here. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some tools that we might be able to use that can provide some analysis. So the first of these that we're going to use. This is going to be like my old adage about Excel tricks. I'm going to show you something how to do in Excel. You may already know how to do this. Many of you probably will. If you don't know how to do it, you're going to say, wow, that was really easy, Dr. Barnes. If you do know how to do it, you're still going to say, wow, that was really easy. I'm going to throw this out there, and I want you to hold this sincerely, truthfully close to your hearts. Do not teach other people how to do these, okay? Our mystique is lost if you teach other people how to do this. I get to do that. I'm an instructor. I get to teach you all how to do it, all right? But you can't go out there and showing your family how to do our tricks, because otherwise they're going to say, well, that's really simple. You don't really know that much, do you? You want people thinking that you know as much as possible, okay? So the very first thing to do is going to do a drop-down list. And if you've never done a drop-down list, it is very, very straightforward. So let's go ahead and go over here to cell E2, which is next to instructor. And I want to pull down my instructor names from a drop-down list. What we're going to do is we're going to go to data, and we're going to click on, in the data tools, we're going to click on one called data validation. All right, so it's the one that looks like a checkbox with a checkbox at the top and a circle slash at the bottom. The data validation one. And it's going to open this window. There's actually a lot of things that we can do through data validation, but I'll be honest, 99% of my tasks that I do in data validation are this particular item right here. So where it says allow, I want you to select in the drop-down list, I want you to say allow a list, okay? We're going to create our own drop-down list, and our source is going to be cells A2 through A7. And the way that it's got it formatted is good because we don't want that changing if we copy that over, but that's fine. This is how we create a drop-down list. Just click OK. And that's all there is to it. We've created a drop-down list, which again, if you've never done that before, it's like, wow, that was so easy. I can't believe how easy that was. You will impress people by doing something that simple. Okay, I can't explain it just why that is, but this is something you can learn through like a 30-second YouTube tutorial, or you can learn in this class, okay? But regardless, don't teach people how to do this because that's something that they'll think is really, really cool, and they won't be able to explain why it's so, or you won't have to explain why it's so cool. You just say, well, I'm just that good. I'm just that good. I can do that in Excel. So obviously, joking aside, this is going to be a mechanism for what we're going to learn for the rest of the time. So let's talk about some tools that actually have some real relevance. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have a drop-down list, and in this rating column, I'd like this to change according to what I want to have for my rating, okay? Now, we already know a few ways we can go about this. We've talked about a VLOOKUP, and a VLOOKUP could be very useful. The VLOOKUP here is kind of challenging in the way that I like to set up VLOOKUP, so I'm just going to type this in. You don't have to follow this. We already done VLOOKUPs, but this is kind of how I naturally do it. I'd say VLOOKUP, and the reason I like VLOOKUPs the most is because they actually can operate on columns. Now, what I mean by that is that I can highlight the columns that I want to use for my VLOOKUP. The problem being is that I've got some columns down here that are kind of joined. So if I try to highlight A through B, it's going to highlight the entire table. and I have to manually go and fix this. And I say, I just want A through B. I want to select what's in the second column. And then remember, I type in false because I want exact matches, which not flash, false. I want to type in false. And that's basically how to do that. And that will work fine enough for our purposes, but that doesn't really teach us anything new. Okay, I've taught you how to integrate this with a drop-down menu, which that's pretty pretty problematic. And something of note, this is going to type up an error, but I want to show you something. Just keep in mind that whenever you don't have a value that matches a VLOOKUP value, it will give you an ugly error. So if I like type in John Smith here, it's going to give me an error here in a second, but it's also going to show a rating of NA. But that NA basically means that, look, this value is not in the list, so I can't find this value for you. Now, the reason I put that up there is that will actually be answered to what we're about to do here in just a second. So I'm going back to Michael Barnes. I want to actually have that drop-down list. I want this drop-down list to stay like this. So one of the newer tools, this is actually only a few years old, is something called XLOOKUP. And this is something that was not available on Truman computers until very recently. In fact, this may be the only lab on campus that we can do this. So we're going to take advantage of it. We're going to take advantage of this XLOOKUP tool. The reason XLOOKUP is so nice is that VLOOKUPs can only look up data in vertical arrays or vertical columns, and then HLOOKUPs have to be used for horizontal arrays or horizontal rows. We can do XLOOKUP to look at both, and both of the tools we're going to talk about today we can actually use horizontally and vertically, which is kind of cool. So let's go ahead and let's replace this with an XLOOKUP. So we're going to type in equals XLOOKUP. And the format for this is slightly different than what we did for VLOOKUP. Even though it's a VLOOKUP function, we can't format it the same way. You do start out with a lookup value, which is still going to be E2. But then we have to actually specify two separate arrays. We have to specify what is the array that we're looking in. And then we want to specify, we hit comma, specify the array that we're looking for results. So again, you should have E2, then you specify A2 through A7, which is the array that we're looking for information. Once we find that, it will specify the row that is the corresponding array in the next array, so B2 through B7. You can't just highlight A2 through B7 and be done with it. That's not going to work. We have to specify separate arrays, which is certainly problematic because, as you note, I liked highlighting the entire column. I didn't like looking at an individual array. This creates problems when you copy this formula over because you actually have to set absolute cell references for your rows, which is a lot of work. I will say that XLOOKUP probably has many advantages over VLOOKUPs. I'm just very old school. So if you prefer XLOOKUP, good on you. You know, that's just me because I've used VLOOKUPs almost exclusively. But that being said, I do see the advantages of this. I also want to add one more thing. So you'll notice it says if not found. This is an optional function. This actually allows us that if we do not find the data that we're looking for, we can specify what result we want to come up with. In the VLOOKUP, it just says pound NA. And that's going to be what it tells us back. But we can actually say, well, if it's not, there's nothing there, we just want it to come up blank. So let's put a set of quotation marks there. And we come up with the same result, which I realize it's not very satisfying because it's just the exact same result we had. But again, we want to check it and make sure that this changes when we put up the information in the drop-down menu. And it does appear that it does. Now, again, let's go ahead and just type in some random name in here, John Smith. And it's going to give me another error, but I want you to look at what happens in the rating. The rating goes blank because we specified we want to return a blank result in our function, which is kind of a nice little addition. If you did this for a VLOOKUP, you'd have to write a separate function to come up with a different result. You'd have to have an is-error function. So having that adaptation in the VLOOKUP function is kind of nice. It's a minor thing, but it's a good habit to get into. Anyway, that's kind of how we use an XLOOKUP function. An XLOOKUP function can actually be a little bit more versatile than a VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP function. Again, it's a little bit more complex in its usage, and you do have to be a little bit more cautious about how you approach it because you do have to specify arrays, but it can be very helpful. But let's talk about one that is a little bit older that a lot of people rely on. I will say that I did not even use this series of functions until I started teaching this class, but there are some really cool things that we can do with this, okay? And it's going to be our index match pairing. So before we can actually talk about index match together, we need to talk about what they do individually. So down here where it says index, I want you to next to the cell instructor, which I've got highlighted just barely. So instructor, let's go ahead and type in the following formula. I'm going to type in equals index. And I want to go through A2 through A7, comma 3. And basically what this formula is saying that, look, in this array, you need to find the third instance of what's in the array. And we can actually do the count here. We can say this is Michael Barnes is number 1, Liz Deers is number 2, so this should return Isaac Eisen as number 3. So we're just going to do that simple formula. Index A2 through A7, 3. And that's Isaac Eisen. Now we can spice this up a little bit if we want to, because we don't have to limit ourselves to a single array or to a single column array or a single row array. We can actually use index across a series. So let's just go ahead and do the rating. We're going to do equals index. And instead of highlighting A2 through A7, let's highlight B2 through B7. Well, we'll have to adapt this formula a little bit. We still want to do 3. But now we actually need to specify column number. This is an optional argument. If we don't put anything in here, it will default to the first column. But this time we want the rating, so let's return the result in the second column. So we're going to say 2. There we go. That's Dr. Eisen's ratings. Great. So that's the first pair. And you will notice index basically says you specify what result you want to return, and we'll return the value with that. Okay. So it says, give me the number within an array, and I'll give you the result that's in that array. Let's go down to match. Match is the exact opposite. Match is saying, give me a value. I will tell you where it occurs within an array. So we're going to do equals match. And I'm going to look up Isaac Eisen in this array. I'm sure Dr. Eisen is thrilled that I'm using his name just so liberally in here for all of you to see forever. And I'm going to highlight array A2 through A7 again. And then I do need to actually add a specific argument because match does have a series of arguments that says match type. This is an optional argument, but I do think it's important to actually enter this argument because you do get really weird results if you don't. So at every match that we're going to do, or every match function, we're going to add a 0 there. And 0 specifies I want an exact match, okay? I want an exact match. So there we go. We know Isaac Eisen is 3 here. Now, interesting about the match function is the match function can work both horizontally and vertically. So let's just do another match function down here. Equals match. And we're going to look up Isaac Eisen again over in A22. Our lookup array is going to be A19 through F19. And we're going to do the 0 at the end again, because again, we want the exact match. So A22, comma, A19 through F19, comma 0. It should be your match function. And it should come up 3 again, because we can count 1, 2, 3. So again, index will tell you what is the result at a certain value. Match will tell you what is the value of a certain result. So they're kind of balancing out one another, what they do. And we use them together, they can be very, very powerful. So let's do that. Let's see what we can do with index match. So we're going to start out with a very basic function. And again, this is a replaceable function. The reason I'm going to show you this is we're going to get really, really complex here in just a second. All right. By the way, I will not give you a super complex equation on the exam for this particular instance. This is mostly for fun, but you will be responsible for everything we've talked about up to this point, plus this next thing I'm talking about. So hopefully you're taking detailed notes. Okay. Other than that, are you planning on watching this recording multiple times? Because not just for exam purposes, but for fun. Okay. So this is Excel Friday. All right, back up in E3. We've already got our lookup function in there, so let's go ahead and put a new function in. I'm going to type in equals index. I'm going to specify A2 through A7. Then I'm going to hit comma, and I'm going to type in a new function. This is an embedded function. So match. And I want to specify what it is that I'm looking for. So I'm looking for the instructor value that's in this row right here. Hold on a second. I just realized. Did I get this right? Oh, sorry. I need to make one change. I realized I got ahead of myself. Back on the index where I said A2 through A7, let's change that to A2 through B7. My apologies. My apologies. Okay, A2, index A2 through B7. All right, match. We're going to E2. Now we're going to highlight A2 through A7. Make sure we have the 0 because we have to look up the exact value. Then we're going to close parentheses, add a comma, and say 2. Now, before we actually put this in here, let's make sure we know what we're looking for. We're looking within this array right here, this array of A2 through B7. What are we looking for? We're looking for the value that matches this entry right here, which is my name currently. Okay, we can change that. And we're going to check it to change that. Wherever that value is, we're going to return the value result that occurs within A2, A7, which is going to be 1. But then we're going to move to the second column over because we specified that 2 says, okay, not the first column, but the second column. So it currently has a value of 4, but if we change the values here, we should come up with the instructor values. Now, the interesting thing about index match is that there's a few ways we can write this function because it does have some variance. So let's just change the formula slightly, okay? So you'll notice that my first iteration of this, I said A2 through B7. I can also specify, because I want to return values through B2, B7, I can actually say, I just want B2 through B7. So it's only going to look over here for the results to return. But I do have to change another part of the function because remember, I specified here at the end of the function that I wanted to return the result in the second column. If I say index B2 through B7, that's only a single column. So I want to change this number to 1. It's a different formula, but it gives us the same result. So the indexing is saying, what is the result we're going to return? This is going to say the result we're looking for. This is going to say what column we're going to actually return the results. So index match pairing, pretty powerful, pretty powerful. Everybody on board with that? Understand it at least basic conceptual level? Okay. So is everybody ready? Let's go ahead and we're gonna take the kid gloves off. Okay, I'm gonna take the kid gloves off. What happens when we have multiple arrays? Specifically, let's click on the next tab, 2024 instructor rankings. We've not only got the instructors, but we've got months. You're probably thinking to yourself, Dr. Barge, you can't possibly be thinking what I think you're thinking. So I'm absolutely thinking that. All right, so let's go ahead and set up some lists. Let's go ahead and set up a drop-down list for instructors and do another one for months. So remember, data validation. We're going to do list. Our source is going to be A3 through A8 for the instructor. And then we're going to do month as well, because we can do lists horizontally and vertically. So our source is going to be B2 through E2 for our month. So the question is, can we write a function that will not only filter on instructor, but also month? The answer is yes. And that function is called index match match. We're going to use 2 embedded match functions. Now, like I said, if you don't understand what's going on here, that's fine. I will not test you on this particular series of functions. This is mostly for fun to see the power of something like this. So let's go down here. We're going to start out with equals index. And like before, there's multiple ways to write this function. I'm going to write the first function, will include our descriptive titles, okay? I will show you how to change this if we do not want to include descriptions here in just a second. So for our first function, we're going to highlight A2 through E8, so the entire table. Next, we're going to write the first of 2 match functions. We're going to type match, and we're going to highlight our instructor name, H3. And we're going to select A2 through A8. Now, I realize that does not make sense because you're saying instructor is not one of the instructor names, Dr. Barnes. Why are you highlighting E2? The answer is because I highlighted the entire table, titles and all. I need to keep the array consistent. And we'll see that when we change it here in just a second, okay? So A2 through A8, remember we always add zeros in our array, or in our arguments, so we get exact match. Then we're going to hit comma. And normally we would enter the column here, but we want the column to float with our results. So this is where we add our second match function. Match. This one's going to look at H4. So if we change that result, it will change as well. We're going to highlight A2 through E2. and then we're gonna hit 0. Then make sure we have double close parentheses. So index A2 through E2, comma, match H3, A2 through A8, 0, match, comma, or match H4, A2, 0. If your formula looks like that, you can go ahead and enter. It should come up 4. All that work for nothing. But what happens when we start changing different arguments? It actually floats according to everything in the table, which is pretty darn cool. Now, before we finish, this came up when I first started teaching this. People are asking, why did you highlight the entire table, Dr. Barnes? And how can you actually specify only the array arguments? The answer is yes, you can change this table. There are multiple ways to approach this, but you do have to know how it will affect other parts of the argument, how it will affect other parts of the formula. So let's go back to our formula again, okay? Let's say that I only want to highlight the information that's in the table. So instead of index A2 through E8, I'm going to highlight B3 through B8. So I'm highlighting B3 through B8. How will that change the rest of the formula? Well, first of all, we're going to go to the match. And because I'm only highlighting the arguments in the table, I no longer want to have instructor as part of my array. So it currently has A2 through A8. Instead of that, I'm going to highlight A3 through A8. And then our second match function, I still have instructor as part of that one as well. So I'm going to replace that. It's going to be B2 through E2. So small changes, but really important changes to make sure that we have a valid set of arguments. Everything else stays consistent because we still want to refer to the same information, but it works the same way. You guys think pretty interesting stuff, huh? Everybody ready to go out and write multi-tiered match functions for everything? This is better than pivot table, let's be honest. I want you to go to Dr. Caden. I want you to say, I learned something that was cooler than the pivot table today. How many people have the courage to do that? Yeah. I don't think I'd have the courage to do that either. Yeah. She kind of scares me sometimes. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about homework. So some pretty straightforward questions on homework. Hopefully this is not too challenging for you. So Ben goes to his bank to wire transfers to $1,000 to his sister Jennifer, which is kind of nice. Ben do something nice like that for his sister. The role of the bank in this transaction is best described as what? So what was the term that I used in the lecture? None of the term, that term is not in here, but I specifically referred to a financial institution as what? An intermediary, okay, an intermediary. And the way the book describes intermediary, I actually put that in slides. That's somebody who's a middleman, okay, a middleman. And so that's somebody in the middle who actually facilitates the exchange, which is kind of the whole synthesis, the whole genesis of this idea of blockchain and why we wanted to have crypto transactions. So moving on to question 5, a selected set of organizations may run a blockchain node separately for keeping the transaction records. Administration from the organizations establish the access rights and permissions for each participant. This type of blockchain is often called what? So we talked about 4 types of blockchains. One of those is not permissionless blockchain. This is not one of those 4 types. Permissionless blockchain is basically just a public blockchain. But we talked about 4 types. We talked about public, private, consortium, and hybrid. Hybrid's not in the book, but it's something you're still responsible for talking about. So what is this going to be an example of? Well, it says a selected set of organizations, so that by itself indicates that we're talking about a consortium blockchain. We're talking about a consortium blockchain. We're talking about single entities, and we'd be dealing more with public or private blockchains, but consortium is a group. All right, none of those questions that I don't like the setup for, but it's still important to actually talk about questions like this. Which of the following statements is false? Okay, so a distributed ledger contains many copies of the same ledger. What do you guys think? Is that a true statement? That is a true statement. That is a true statement. A distributed ledger stores the same set of transaction records. Well, based on A, that's probably going to be true as well, because this ledger is going to contain the same transaction records. No reason. I'm going to jump down to D. A transaction record cannot be added to the blockchain unless there's network consensus. What do you guys think about that one? That is a true statement. The whole consensus step is the whole point of the blockchain. We want to make sure there's consensus because that's how we validate transactions. So consensus is really important with respect to a blockchain. So because distributed ledger exists in a blockchain network, and computer consisting of all transaction records may crash and causes the seeking issue in the blockchain network. That is not correct. There's synchronous updates. If there's a system that's not on there, they will update later, but it will not prevent syncing on the other nodes that are on the network. All nodes that are currently online will update synchronously at the same time. I realize synchronously at the same time, that's a redundant statement, okay? All right, question number 9. When we refer to smart contracts in blockchain or a smart contract in blockchain, what do they mean? Okay, so we talked about this. This is an example of a code that executes automatically if certain conditions are met. So basically, if we're talking about this, we're not talking about a contract like in a traditional sense. We talked about Professor Templeton. We're not talking about a paper contract. We're not talking about a digital contract. We're just talking about code that can be executed or triggered by business activities. So the example would be is that if we have a party that engages in a transaction and they've specified what results, then the transaction will automatically be created. The reason it's called a smart contract is that any type you engage in a business transaction like that, it is considered to be a contract between two parties. But it is effectively just a piece of software code that triggers upon a result. That's all that we're talking about with respect to smart contract. All right, question number 13. Which of the following is not true with respect to artificial intelligence? AI is a broad field of computer science. Did you even need to take this course to be able to answer that question? What'd you learn today? What'd you learn today in Dr. Barnes' class? I'm sure your parents always ask you that. You call you every evening and say, what'd you learn in Dr. Barnes' class today? Today you can say nothing, okay? I learned AI was a broad field of computer science. I knew that since I was a kid, okay? I knew that since I was a kid. All right, so A is definitely true. AI is intelligence exhibited by machines rather than humans, okay? All right, another pretty straightforward statement, all right? AI began in the 1990s. Is that a true statement? Does anybody know when AI began? Yeah, so it's the 1950s. 1956 is kind of the acknowledgement of when it began. So you can actually find this out. I've been doing some research on this, but this is kind of what's guidelines. Although interestingly, in the book Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, which I mentioned in our discussion, there was actually a chess robot that was created in the 1800s that was put on display. And they said that was kind of the earliest form of artificial intelligence, but turns out it was not machine. It's actually a chess master, a very small chess master who was actually inside the robot making the moves, okay? And so, yeah, that was kind of a scam. So, you know, it's an interesting story, but not in that. AI is called cognitive technology. We actually talked about that in the slide. So C is our answer. It began in the 1950s. All right, question number 14. Which of the following best describes the difference between AI and machine learning? So we talked about that diagram. We said AI is the broad basis, and then a subset of AI is machine learning, and then a subset of machine learning, what was the one we talked about, is what? Deep learning, okay? So deep learning is a subset of machine learning. Machine learning is a subset of AI. That's all there is to it. So machine learning is a subset of AI. A is our answer. Which of the following best describes machine learning? All right, machine learning. So machine learning is driven by programming instructions. Is that true? That would really defeat the purpose, because if we have to give instructions, it's not really learning. It's just following tasks, okay? Machine learning is a different branch of computer science AI. We know from the previous answer that's not correct, that it is a subset of AI. Machine learning is a technique where software models is trained using data. Is that true? Yes, we talked about the 4 different machine learning mechanism types, and we have to have data for all of those. So C is definitely going to be a model of that. And the machine learning is the ability of a machine to think on its own. That's not really the case. It sounds really, really good, but again, it's not really thinking on its own. It's emulating human intelligence. All right, question number 18. Which of the following best describes deep learning? I don't want to go too much in detail about deep learning in this class, but I do want to make sure that we're clear on what deep learning is characterized by. So deep learning is basically trying to emulate the patterns of human intelligence and the human brain's networks. When we talk about human brain, we ought to talk about neural connections. And so they actually use that terminology to describe deep learning, which is neural networks. So deep learning involves complex multi-layer neural networks. The interesting thing about it is that we've reached the point now in deep learning that the scientist can't actually follow the patterns of the neural network development, which is kind of scary because that's actually how humans work. That's where our neural networks are unpredictable and they're basically created by events that occur to us on an everyday basis. Machines are now actually emulating that to some degree. So kind of a scary time, but also an exciting time, depending on, you know, like if you're a big fan of the Terminator series, a very scary time, okay? But yeah, something to think about. Question number 19. Which of the following is not directly related to one of the 5 questions of machine AI learning AI is best suited to answer? So remember, our 2 categories of learning were going to be classification and regression. Classification is basically a 2-tiered categorization question. or it could be multi-tiered if we combine it, but then regression is trying to predict a value. So which business strategy would be most successful? That just sounds like more than 2 tiers of classification. That's likely our answer, but let's go through the rest. Is the firm a good merger candidate? That's an easy classification, yes, no, okay. Which type of customer will like this new product, okay. That's probably a little bit more of a 2-tier classification, but it's a little bit more clean than our first question. And then how much can we sell this product for? That's a regression analysis. So personally, all of these I think could be answered by 5 questions, but I think the one that stands out the most as being most challenging is A, which business strategy would be most successful, simply because that does require more subjective analysis than the others. All right, these next questions, I hope you pay close attention to these. These are questions that are very likely, not these exact questions, but these types of questions are very likely to be on the exam, okay? The 4 types of machine learning. So remember, our first one's called supervised learning. What is the characteristic of supervised learning? We have both input and what else? Known output, okay? The whole point of being is saying we want to make sure that the machine is actually following what the rules are, and their output matches what our output is, okay? So supervised learning, training data contains input-output pairs, so we can actually check to make sure the machine is doing what it should be doing. The next one is considered to be unsupervised learning. So what disappears in unsupervised learning? The same thing that we had present in supervised learning. It disappears output, okay? We only have input values. We do not have output values. So unsupervised, we don't know what the result's supposed to be. This is only something that we've effectively trained using supervised learning previously, not something that we can train usually train by itself. So unsupervised learning, no output pairs. Semi-supervised learning. Semi-supervised learning, you probably are going to be like, well, that sounds like a mix between the two. So it's probably some output, which is weird because that's not the answer. Okay, that's not the answer. What happens in semi-supervised learning? Well, remember, we talked about data analysis. Data analysis is not a clean science. We talked about this back in chapter 10. We talked about how cleaning of the data is a real challenge because sometimes the data does not contain information that's readable by the machine or even acknowledgeable. Sometimes it's missing values. We want AI tools, we want machine learning tools to be able to analyze information even if it's incomplete. So semi-supervised learning is focused on trying to make determinations, trying to make evaluations based on incomplete data. So training data contains some missing labels and incomplete data. That's much the way the human brain operates, is that we sometimes have to make leaps in logic without all of the information available to us. So A is our answer. And finally, reinforcement learning. Okay, with reinforcement learning, what are the 3 words that you should always think about with respect to reinforcement learning? Trial and error. Okay, trial and error. When you hear reinforcement learning, that's what should be focused on. Trial and error can be utilized with other types of learning, but usually it means that the machine learning tool is going to make mistakes. And it's up to reinforce the correct behavior. It's like the early versions of ChatGPT, when you say, okay, how do you depreciate land? And it gave you this robust journal entry on depreciating land. You have to say, no, you don't depreciate land. And then ChatGPT comes back and says, that was a trick question, wasn't it? You say, yes, it was. But you learned from it, didn't you? Said, yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that. All right, so that's an example of trial and error, trying to make sure that when it makes a mistake, that we actually correct that issue. All right, moving on to our discussion questions. So question number 4, one of the 4 types of blockchains, despite what the book says, 4 types of blockchain, what are the major differences between those? So remember, public blockchain generally has a permissionless process, okay? Anybody can access it. Private blockchain, on the other hand, does have a permission process, okay? It's going to be transaction data and validation restricted in the private blockchain. Consortium blockchain is a permission of blockchain, so it's private still, but it's actually multiple organizations instead of a single organization. And then a hybrid blockchain is a combination of public and private blockchain controlled by one authority, but usually involving a permissionless process. So there's going to be oversight, but no permissions involved on people who are getting into the system. Make sure you have a good understanding of distinction between those, as there will likely be a question on that in the exam. It's important to understand the distinction between those. All right. Recently, more than 20% of companies surveyed they were testing and considering artificial intelligence applications in their business, but only 4% actively using AI. Now, this is an older book. This book was written, I think, in 2022. That number is definitely higher nowadays. But it's still an interesting question. Why do you think companies are interested in AI but having trouble implementing AI? So the interested in AI question is very easy to answer. That AI has the potential to do things much more effectively than we can ourselves. We're starting to see that now. Is anybody taking capstone class or anybody enrolled in the capstone class in the future? Yeah, So that capstone class, there's a lot of writing involved in it. You know what's really, really good at writing? AI tools, okay? You know what gets Dr. Otero's dandruff when you talk about writing? AI tools, okay? So yeah, we have to know that they're going to be much more effective writers than we will ever be. And so if I wanted to say, write a research paper on this topic and I give it enough data, it will actually write a much better research paper than I can have, which is something I've definitely considered. That level of efficiency, that level of effectiveness is important. Imagine that I spend 20 minutes responding to an email, that instead I could just put the necessary inputs and say, respond to this email effectively in my tone. And they could the tool could actually respond to a student's email inquiry to something that might take me a long time to type up. I haven't gotten to that point yet, by the way. Any of the responses you've received from me in email, they've all come from me, not from an AI tool, I promise, okay? But I have thought about it because sometimes students ask multiple questions in email. Very, very zealous, which I certainly appreciate, but it is time consuming. So the efficiency is really, really important. But why do you think companies are not actively adopting these? Why isn't every single company? Part of this has to do with cost, and a lot of this has to do with resources. Does anybody, I think I may have talked about this already, but I apologize if I'm repeating myself. Did I talk about 3 Mile Island on our AI discussion on Monday? So 3 Mile Island, a nuclear facility that's being reopened after a big meltdown, big catastrophic meltdown. The reason why is that there's a need for more power because of these AI call centers, AI data centers, not call centers, data centers. They absorb a bunch of resources. So having that power is going to be really important, and it's going to become more costly over the time. So that's one big reason. But a much more basic reason is the gap of learning. Now, your generation is going to look at this and say, we're starting at the ground floor, and it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to only gain from there. But imagine that you're my age. You've worked with Excel, and you've worked with basic data analytics tools, and you're very comfortable. And then all of a sudden, this new tool is thrown out, and you say, use this new tool. And it's like, I don't know how to use this new tool. I've never used it before. That's one big impediment, because a lot of the people who are running organizations are my age or older, and people who are not accustomed to these new technologies, and they're disruptive technologies. You want to see something that's really, really crazy? You should have, or I should have taken videos of it, because it was amazing. Because I went to a lot of AI sections during this data conference that was taking place over the summer, and it was a bunch of people who are teaching accounting at universities all across the country, and they were trying to learn how to use AI tools. And I have never seen a group of audience members despair in that way. All right, they were just like, "Tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared." They weren't saying those words, but you could see it in their faces. There is a group of people out there who are trying to teach this information, or trying to convey and learn this information, that are really, really scared because they're like, I don't know how to do this. And it's fairly self-explanatory, fairly intuitive. But even then, because they're so acclimated to other tools that are not so intuitive, they're afraid of these tools. So I'll tell you right now, I'm not a perfect user of this. I'm not going to be the one that tells you to become a master of using AI tools. You're not going to leave this university and say, well, Dr. Barnes taught us anything. I'm ready to jump in head first. I'm not going to be able to teach you everything because I don't know everything or even anywhere close to that. I will tell you that there are other universities where there are professors who know next to nothing, and they're terrified of trying to learn anything. Think about that at an organizational level. We've got an organization that's been successful for like 50 years. The person who's running it's in their 60s or 70s. They barely use Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, and you're telling them, use these AI tools to help your planning. It's like, I don't want a machine making decisions that I could make myself. That's a big impediment that we could run into. That's something we have to consider. Now, the good news is, as your generation takes over and gets rid of us fogies, okay, then there will actually be more adoption of this. And I think it will occur much more quickly than not. I think by the time that you all enter the workforce, there will be a lot more acclimation to this. But at the time this book was written, 4% of companies were only using AI tools, which is really kind of a slow adoption pace. So something to consider. All right, we're done for this week. I will see you all on Monday for internal controls.